Hello and welcome to Lessons in Tanya. We are about to begin chapter 3 of the Tanya. The first two chapters of Tanya we discussed in chapter 1, primarily the animal soul and how it is connected with the Yetzer Ra, the evil inclination. And in chapter 2 we discussed the divine soul, which is a spark of Elohim. And we discussed how it is only influenced by the Yetzer Tov. And so we discussed as the Tanya will continue, we'll learn more about the conflict between the Yetzer Ra and the Yetzer Tov, and the important part that the second soul, the divine soul, plays in that conflict. But before we get that far, in chapter 3, Rebbe Zellman will begin to explain to us the anatomy of the divine soul. And as he continues in further chapters, we'll also learn about the anatomy of the animal soul, which is very much the same, but not exactly this. There's a little bit of difference, but not much. So we're really talking in general terms about the anatomy of a soul, and specifically the divine soul, but the anatomy is very much the same for the animal soul. And when we talk about a soul here, we're talking about what's called a narn. A narn is an acronym for Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Nefesh is the Hebrew word that we usually translate as soul, but Ruach is the word that we translate for spirit, and Neshama is a word in Hebrew for which there is no English translation. It's often used to refer to the human soul, the higher soul, the intellect, what makes a man an intellect rather than a human soul rather than an animal soul. But in Rebbe Zalman's discussion, when he uses the term soul, he's really talking about the narn, the whole of this. And really in the first 8 chapters of Tanya, the Rebbe Zalman lays out the foundations of his arguments, and he makes the basic building block points, essentially the premises upon which his conclusions later on in the book are all based. And obviously, if we're going to learn what the Tanya basically overall teaches, which is the concept that the wisdom of Torah then gestates in the womb of our understanding and gives birth to da'at, to knowledge, and that da'at, knowledge, is the driving force of emotions, of an outpouring of emotion. Remember now, we said earlier in lesson 1 that the Tanya was written as a response to the argument that Hasidism is the Baal Shem Tov's Hasidism was merely an emotional hype, and was all just a bunch of emotional hype, and there was no intellectual basis for it. And so the Rebbe Zellman writes the Tanya to lay out the intellectual basis for Hasidism. And that became the basis for the Chabad movement within Hasidism, which is known as the intellectual branch of Hasidism. Chabad is actually based on an acronym that we'll find as we continue the study today, derived from this concept. Okay, so as we enter chapter 3, chapter 3 has an amazing parallel to the 4th book of the Maccabees. And that's important because the 4th book of the Maccabees may very well have been written by Antigonus of Soko. Antigonus of Soko was the leader of the first Hasidic revival. The second Hasidic revival in Rabbinic Judaism that was led by the Baal Shem Tov, instigated by the Baal Shem Tov, took place in the 17th century. The original Hasidic revolution, if you will, the original Hasidic restoration, took place under the leadership of Antigonus of Soko in the days of the Maccabees, around 250 years before Yeshua. And the Antigonus of Soko is mentioned in the Mishnah in Tractate Avot 1:4, I believe it is, in the very first few verses. And what it says is that Antigonus of Soko was a student of Simon the Righteous. Simon the Righteous being, we're told in the Mishnah, a remnant of the great assembly established by Ezra and Nehemiah. And Antigonus of Soko's teaching was that we should observe the Torah according as if we were one who is not looking for a reward, and not as one who is seeking to be paid or recompensed, but as one who has no mind of a reward. And that we should fear Elohim. And this fear that we're talking about is awe. It's like how awesome Elohim is. It's like going to the Grand Canyon and having a healthy respect and an awe for the Grand Canyon, but it's not like, oh, I'm scared. Although there's a healthy respect, you get too close to the edge, you could fall, and and so on. But it's a fear and awe, a respect for Elohim. That respect that is the driving force, part of the driving force. Also, the love of Elohim. Also, of course, the driving force behind why we observe Torah. It is a chesed movement, if you will, Antigonus of Soko's teaching. It is the teaching of Paul. It is what Paul's writings are all about, and we get into that, and we'll be getting into that in my series, Understanding Paul. In fact, Romans and the Tanya go hand in hand, and we'll also be talking about that a lot in my study of Romans, in my Understanding Paul class. Okay, so the foundational teaching of Antigonus of Soko is chesed-based, grace-based, undue favor-based. We're not trying to earn salvation, so salvation is simply undue favor. It's the result of nothing that we could possibly do. So we're not trying to earn salvation, which is why Paul, the Tanya and 4th Maccabees, and Antigonus of Soko's teaching all kind of go hand in hand here, because it has to do with the motive of why we observe Torah, which is one of the reasons Paul is so misunderstood, because Paul's not, 90% of the time, Paul's not talking about salvation. He's talking about the motive behind why we observe Torah. We don't observe Torah because we're trying to earn something. We observe Torah, when we observe Torah, it's because Daddy said so. It's because we are cleaving to Elohim. It is because we are going through it's part of a process whereby we are internalizing the mind of Elohim. Okay, and we'll talk more about that later too. That's what the Tanya is about. And so we get into chapter 3, and I said chapter 3 parallels 4th Maccabees because the 4th book of the Maccabees, the books of the Maccabees are written on 4 levels of understanding. The first book of the Maccabees is written on the Peshat level, and it deals with the plain, simple recounting of the story of the Maccabees. The second book of the Maccabees digs into the details of the story. It contains a lot of details not in 1st Maccabees. Then we get to 3rd Maccabees, and it's written on the Drosh level, the allegorical homiletical level, because it's actually not about the Maccabees at all. It's about a different revolt that took place about 50 years earlier than the Maccabees in Egypt. It's about events that took place that parallel the Maccabean events. And then we have the 4th book of the Maccabees, which is written on the Sod level, which parallels Tanya and has to do with the mind and the emotions. So Tanya chapter 3 begins. Now each distinction and grade of the three, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, consists of 10 faculties corresponding to the 10 Sefirot, divine manifestations, from which have descended or subdivided into two, namely the three mothers and the 7 multiples, to wit, Chochmah, Binah, and Da'at, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and the 7 days of creation, Chesed, kindness, Gevarah, Tiferet, and so on. In other words, kindness, power, beauty, and so on. In Kabbalah, it is taught that there are 10 Sefirot. These 10 Sefirot are 10 aspects of the Godhead that are also 10 aspects of us. Let me explain. Elohim is Ein Sof. Elohim proper is Ein Sof. Ein Sof is a term in Hebrew which means without boundaries, without limitations. So Ein Sof is beyond our comprehension. We can't really understand what Ein Sof is. We can't relate to Ein Sof because Ein Sof is beyond our comprehension. And in order to relate to mankind then, Ein Sof has manifest Elohim, manifest Ein Sof in this universe in a finite, scaled down version called the image of Elohim, which we read about in the Torah. The image of Elohim is often used interchangeably with Elohim. The image of Elohim is the image after which we were created. The image of Elohim is, according to Genesis, male and female. It's not literally male and female. It's the allegorical elements from which our male and female aspects were derived and express Elohim in this world, as we read in Romans chapter 1. So we are the image of Elohim. Let's talk about this image of Elohim for a moment. The Empire State Building, for example, is too large to bring into this room. But I could take a picture of the Empire State Building and then bring it into this room, the picture, and point to it and say, that's the Empire State Building. And someone who is familiar with the Empire State Building might say, yes, I recognize that. That's the Empire State Building. Someone else might come along wanting to pick a fight, perhaps, or simply draw the nuance and say, no, that's not the Empire State Building. That's only an image of the Empire State Building. And in a sense, they're both right. And the same thing happens in the scriptures. Oftentimes, the image of Elohim is referred to as Elohim, as being Elohim. And it's perfectly acceptable to do that. We do it. Scripture does it. When we're really not necessarily, we're only talking about the image of Elohim, not Ein Sof directly. Because Ein Sof, we really can't say much about Ein Sof, because Ein Sof is beyond our comprehension, beyond Ein Sof, beyond definition. Okay, if you can't define it, then the minute you start to ascribe qualities to it, you're no longer talking about it, you're starting to talk about the scaled down version of it, if you will, the image of Elohim. Okay, man was created in the image of Elohim. So, man has these same 10 aspects in him, and this is very important in terms of cleaving to Elohim, okay, because we want to have unity with Elohim. We want to have devikus, or devikut. We want to cleave to Elohim. The Torah tells us to cleave to Elohim. And so in cleaving to Elohim and resonating with Elohim, then it's very important to recognize in ourselves the elements that are parallel to the elements that are a part of Elohim. And this is laid out in a diagram called the Tree of Life. And the diagram that's used lays out the relationships between these 10 Sefirot. there's 3 upper Sefirot and 7 lower Sefirot. And this is all talked about in an ancient book called the Sefirot. And the Sefirot is what definitely the Tanya is referring to, because in the Sefirot we're specifically told it invents, if you will, or establishes terminology by which it refers to the upper 3 Sefirot as 3 mothers. The Sefirot actually takes the 22 Hebrew letters and it divides them into 3 groups. 3 mothers, 7 doubles or multiples, and 12 elementals. Now you may notice that these are 3 very important numbers in Scripture: 3, 7, 12. And the Tanya, however, is dealing with the 10 Sefirot, which are the first 10 of these, correspond with the first 10 of these, and correspond with the 3 mothers and the 7 doubles or 7 multiples. Okay, the 7 doubles, the 7 multiples are said in the Sefirot to have correspondences to such things as the 7 days of the week, which is why he mentions in the Tanya here the 7 days of creation in relationship to the 7 midot. Now, more importantly here, well, let's talk a little bit more about these 10 Sefirot. They're actually derived from Scripture, although they're a focal point of the Sefirot. They are derived from Scripture. The first 3 Sefirot deal with the mental faculties and their wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And we see these in Exodus 31:3, where it says, "And I have filled him with the spirit of Elohim, in wisdom and in understanding and in knowledge and in all manner of workmanship." And in Proverbs 24, verses 3 through 4, "With wisdom a house is built, with understanding it is established, and with knowledge its rooms are filled." Okay, these first 3 are Chachma, Binah, Da'at. Now actually, Da'at is not actually the name of a Sefirot. It's considered the flip side of a Sefirot called Keter, which is crown. Okay, but it bridges the gap to the lower Sefirot, and it is treated sometimes as if some call it a semi-Sefirot, but in terms of the Tanya, it's really dealt with as if it's one of the 10 Sefirot. Okay, and the Sefirot are also derived, all of them, from 1 Chronicles 29:11, the 7 lower Sefirot. "Yours, O Yahweh, is the greatness, the power, and the glory, and the victory, and the majesty, for all that is in heaven and on earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, Yahweh, and you are exalted as head above all." That's 1 Chronicles 29:11. Also in Isaiah 11:2, "The Spirit of Yahweh shall rest upon him," speaking of the Mashiach, "the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and power, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of Yahweh." So these are the Scripture passages from which these 10 Sefirot are derived. All right. Let us continue in Tanya. Similarly, it is with the human soul, which is divided into sechel, intellect, and midot, emotional attributes. The intellect includes Chachma, Binah, and Da'at. Chabad. That's the acronym from which Chabad takes its name, by the way. The Chabad movement is Chachma, Binah, Da'at, which are actually the 3 Sefirot that lead up or head up the 3 pillars of the Godhead. Okay? Whilst the midot, glorification of him, and so forth. Chabad, the intellectual faculties, are called mothers and source of the midot. For the latter, are offspring of the former. All right, now the Sefirot Yitzhak only tells us that it's very vague and very concise. The Sefirot Yitzhak simply tells us that the upper three Sefirot are mothers. It doesn't tell us why they're called mothers. Tanya tells us why they are called mothers. Tanya tells us, well, they're called mothers because they are the source of the seven lower Sefirot, the seven doubles, or seven multiples. Okay. So the seven multiples are essentially offspring, springing forth from the upper three. Now remember, the point of Tanya is, as we talked about in lesson 1, that the wisdom of Elohim gestates in our understanding, the Chachma gestates in our Binah and produces Da'at, and from that Da'at, from that knowledge of Elohim within us, springs forth a whole set of emotions: the love of Yahweh, the fear and awe of Yahweh, and the glorification of Yahweh. All of these things are emotions, opinions, feelings. Okay? The upper three Sefirot are about how we think, but the lower Sefirot are about how we feel. And the point of Tanya is that the joy and dancing and love for Yahweh that results from the Torah is an intellectual process that leads to an emotional process. Likewise, the awe of Yahweh. Okay, so the emotional response that is in Hasidism is the result of an intellectual process. But more importantly, is that, or profoundly, is that Zalman in Tanya here lays out the division of the human soul into two parts: the mind and the emotions, the sechel and the midot. And that's very, very profound, because we find the same division in the fourth book of the Maccabees. By the way, this division is why when we're laying tefillin, we wrap the tefillin around the arm 10 times for the 10 Sefirot, 3 around the upper arm for the 3 upper Sefirot, and 7 around the lower arm for the 7 lower Sefirot, the 7 midot. Okay. Fourth Maccabees, like I said, an entire study of Fourth Maccabees with the 3rd chapter of Tanya is totally in order, but we really don't have time for that, except in terms of maybe sometime doing a Fourth Maccabees class, because it's several chapters long in itself. I think 14 chapters, but it's much longer than the 1 chapter of 3 of Tanya, because it lays out examples. Let's first present the argument from Fourth Maccabees. Fourth Maccabees, in the first 4 verses, states its argument this way, and I read from my translation of the Aramaic text of Fourth Maccabees, which I believe is far superior to the Greek translation of Fourth Maccabees. Unfortunately, it's never been translated into English. The only English versions I'm aware of Fourth Maccabees are translations of the Greek text of Fourth Maccabees, which use a lot of Greek Stoic terminology, much more so than the Aramaic text of Fourth Maccabees. Okay, the Aramaic text of Fourth Maccabees, starting in verse 1. The word of philosophy that I am about to discuss before you. If the true mind of Shalom is sovereign to the fear of Elohim, I am an upright advisor to you that you should pay earnest attention in philosophy. For it is also necessary that all men to suffer, more expressly these are steps in virtue. For I bear a good report. If the mind of balance is over the emotions that stand against temperance, showing that the mind of virtue rules over gluttony and over lust. And it is not only over the walk, but also over the other emotions that hinder righteousness. It is shown to be sovereign over fornication and evil and other emotions that impede courage, over rage, and that a man be not soft before the tribulation, and over fear. Now, he's talking about some of these emotions he's talking about are not emotions of the divine soul. But as Tanya continues, we'll also learn about the 7 midot, the 7 emotions of the animal soul that are influenced by the Yetzer Hara, that we must also overcome. And that's the emotions that are being discussed here, as opposed to the positive emotions that our section of Tanya is talking about right now, which are in the divine soul. These are the emotions of love for Yahweh and fear or awe of Yahweh that lead to a desire to observe Torah. And that we'll get into as the Tanya continues. Skipping to verse 13 in 4th Maccabees, the question therefore is this: if the mind is sovereign over emotion, but you may ask, what is the mind, and what is emotion, and what are the kinds of emotion? And is the mind sovereign over all of them? The mind, therefore, is thus, that in uprightness we choose the life of Chachma, wisdom. Now, wisdom, or Chachma, is da'at, knowledge, of the hosts, of the Godhead, i.e. the 10 Sefirot, and the manhood, and of their effects. So the 10 Sefirot in the image of Elohim, the 10 Sefirot in man, and their effects. Now this is the discipline that is in the Torah, that through the Torah also, you learn of the Godhead greatly and manhood to our advantage and obtaining favor, obtaining chesed. So there's an obtaining of chesed that is the result of knowledge of the Godhead, the attributes in the Godhead and the attributes in man, and how they parallel each other. This is just perfect, very, very Tanya compatible, but it was written long before Tanya. And there exists in pleasure a malicious disposition, which is the most multiform of all the affections. In the soul it is arrogance and love of money and vaingloriousness and contention and faithlessness and the evil eye, which is greediness. In the body it is greediness and gormandizing and solitary gluttony. Now this is talking really here about the emotions of the animal soul, which are influenced by the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, which Tanya is going to be teaching us about how to overcome these emotions of the lower animal soul through the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of our divine soul flowing through the midot of our divine soul, so that our divine soul takes mastery over our animal soul. Okay. So this is the point of 4th Maccabees. Okay. Continuing in Tanya. The explanation of the matter is as follows. Explains the comment, explain as follows. The intellect of the rational soul, which is the faculty that conceives anything, is given the appellation of Chachma, the potentiality of what is. When one brings forth this power from the potential into the actual, that is, when a person cognates with his intellect, in order to understand a thing truly and profoundly, it evolves from the concept which he has conceived in his intellect. This is called Binah. In other words, when it's just information, but it's information that hasn't been processed yet, it's Chachma. When I process it, it becomes Binah, understanding. These, Chachma and Binah, are the very father and mother which give birth to the love of Elohim and the awe and dread of him. Okay? Remember now, there's a parallel between these attributes in ourselves and in the Godhead. Okay? In the Godhead, in the image of Elohim, there are three pillars. Remember I said that there's this diagram of the 10 Sefirot. They're laid out in three columns. Okay? And one of these columns is the pillar of mercy. One is or chesed. One's the pillar of severity. They also may be called by their upper Sefirot the pillar of wisdom and the pillar of understanding. There's a pillar in between these that is the pillar of da'at, the pillar of knowledge. It's headed up by Keter, crown, and it is also the pillar of tiferet, of glorification of Elohim. Okay, the glory of Elohim. This middle pillar, these three pillars are talked about in the Zohar. In the Zohar, we are told that there are three pillars and the three pillars are the pillar the three pillars are father and mother, and the middle pillar is called in the Zohar the son of Yah. Let me see if I have that information here in my notes. Okay. Zohar says, and Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light, referring to Genesis 1:3. From here is the beginning of finding treasures. Now the world was created in particular, for now it was general, and now it was general, and then returns to speaking in general terms, so that it will be general, specific, general. Until now, everything was suspended in the air by the secret of Ein Sof. Once its power spread into the upper temple, the secret of Elohim utterance is written. That's not the passage I was looking for. Okay, I thought I had this in my notes, but here we go. Concerning this too it is written, let there be light, and there was light. Again, referring to Genesis 1:3. Why, it may be asked, was it necessary to repeat the word light in this verse? The answer is that the first light refers to the primordial light, which is the right hand, and is destined for the end of days, while the second light refers to the left hand, which issues from the right. The next words, and Elohim saw the light that it was good, Genesis 1:4, refers to the pillar which stands midway between them and unites both sides. And therefore, when the unity of the three, right, left, and middle, was complete, it was strife between right and left, as is written, and Elohim separated between the light and between the darkness. And then Zohar 1:16b, that was Zohar 2, 167a, and then volume 1:16b says, this is the middle pillar, Ki Tov, that it was good, through light above and below on all sides, in the virtue of Yahweh, the name which embraces all sides. And also in Zohar Volume 2, 115, page 115. Better is a neighbor that is near than a neighbor that is than a brother far off. The neighbor is the middle pillar in the Godhead, which is the Son of Yah. And in the Zohar, there is a picture that is drawn in multiple passages in which these three pillars represent Father, Mother, and the middle pillar represents the Son of Yah. Okay? And here we learn that this reflects in us when we take the wisdom of Torah and we understand the Torah, then that wisdom is like a seed that then gestates in understanding and gives birth to da'at, to knowledge, and that knowledge then is the Son of Yah within us, the middle pillar of the Godhead within our very selves. Okay? And this fits because, excuse me, trying to keep my voice up. This keeps us going, this brings us forward because the Torah is the Son of Yah. The Torah then is being written within us because the Torah is the seed that then gestates, becomes understanding, then the Torah becomes knowledge within us. That Torah then becomes part of us, and therefore the Son of Yah, the middle pillar, is within us. And this is what we talked about in the last chapter of Tanya. We discussed it then when it said, so allegorically speaking, have the souls of Jews risen in the divine thought, as it is written, my firstborn son is Israel, and you are children unto Yahweh your Elohim. That is to say, just as a child is derived from the father's brain, and so on. Okay. So, now we see why the parallel between the Son of Yah and Israel personified, because Israel collectively is the Son of Yah in the sense that we have the Son of Yah within us, we have the Torah within us, and then that makes us collectively representations of the Son of Yah. Okay, back to Tanya. These Chachma and Binah are the very father and mother which give birth to the love of Elohim and the awe and dread of him. For when the intellect in the rational soul deeply contemplates and immerses itself exceedingly in the greatness of Elohim, how he fills all the worlds and encompasses all worlds, in the presence of whom everything is considered as nothing. There will be born and around in his mind mind and thought, the emotion of awe for the divine majesty, to fear and be humble before his blessed greatness, which is without end or limit, and to have the dread of Elohim in his heart. Next, his heart will glow with an intense love, like burning coals, and passion, desire and longing and yearning the soul towards the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof. This constitutes the culminating passions of the soul, which the scripture speaks as, my soul longs, yes, even faints, and my soul thirsts for Elohim, and my soul thirsts for you. This thirst is derived from the element of fire, which is to be found in the divine soul. As students of the natural science affirm, and as it is in its Kayim, the element of fire is in the heart, whilst the source of the element, water, the moisture, is in the brain, which is explained in Etzchaim Portal 50 to refer to the faculty of Chachma, wisdom, called the water of the divine soul. The rest of the midot are all offshoots of fear and love and their derivations, as is explained elsewhere. So the Tanya teaches that all of the seven midot in the divine soul in the fear of Elohim, and the fear and awe of Elohim, and the love of Elohim. Okay? And there's 7 midot, according to Tanya. This also parallels what we read in 4th Maccabees. Starting in chapter 1, starting in verse 20. Of the passions, pleasure and pain are the 2 most comprehensive, and they also by nature refer to the soul, and there are many attendant affections surrounding pleasures and pain. Now this is talking about the animal soul, of course. Before pleasure is lust, and after pleasure joy. And before pain is fear, and after pain is sorrow. Wrath is an affection common in pleasure and to pain, if anyone will pay attention when it comes upon him. And there exists in pleasure a malicious disposition, which is the most multiform of all the affections. In the soul it is arrogance, and love of money, and vaingloriousness, and contention, and faithfulness, and the evil eye. In the body it is greediness, and gordomizing, and solitary gluttony. That's 4th Maccabees, chapter 1, verses 20 through 27. Now, remember now, it's talking about negative emotions in the sense that it's talking about the animal soul, but notice there's 2 polarizing emotions and 7 emotions overall. Okay? And so this is exactly what the 4th Maccabees teaches. And the parallels with 4 Maccabees are profound. And what you should definitely want to study 4th Maccabees in connection with Tanya, because the 2 of them go hand in hand. 4th Maccabees goes on in chapter 1 to explain how the Torah in our minds, in our wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, gives us mastery over eating unkosher food. So when we're tempted to eat unkosher food, we overcome that temptation by way of the Torah that is in our minds, and overcomes the feeling and the desire in the emotions of our animal souls to eat unkosher food. In 4th Maccabees chapter 2 then goes on to discuss how Joseph, using this very technique, having the Torah in his mind, was able to overcome the temptation of his animal soul emotions when he was tempted by Potiphar's wife. And we're given many other examples throughout 4th Maccabees, particularly the martyrs, the Hanukkah martyrs, the Hanukkah story, Eleazar and Hannah and her 7 sons that we read about in 2nd Maccabees, and Hannah and her 7 sons we also read about in the Talmud, who were able to overcome the emotions of the animal soul because of the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding of the mind of their divine soul. Okay. Let us continue in Tanya. Da'at, the etymology of which is to be found in the verse, and Adam yada Eve. Adam knew Eve. In other words, it's called, the word da'at comes from the root, is related to the root to know, and there is a connection when we talk about Adam knew Eve. In other words, to know someone is used in idiomatically in Hebrew to mean to have sex with them. So when Adam and Chava copulated, that this is why it's a picture of knowledge, because knowledge results from Binah and Da'at brought together. Okay? And we've been discussing this throughout, so now the connection is the dots are being connected here by Rabbi Zalman in the Tanya. Implies attachment and union. This is one binds his mind with a very firm and strong bond to, and firmly fixes his thought on the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof, without diverging his mind from him. For even one who is wise and understanding of the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof will not, unless he binds his knowledge and fixes his thought with firmness, and perceive perseverance produce in his soul true love and fear, but only vain fancies. In other words, it can't be just a passive knowledge. It has to be a passionate knowledge. Therefore, da'at is the basis of the midot and the source of their vitality. It contains chesed and gevurah, that is to say, love and its offshoots, and fear and its offshoots. In other words, the 7 positive emotions towards Elohim flow from da'at. They're actually embedded within da'at. Da'at, knowledge, okay? When we know the Torah and it's part of us, and we'll get more into that later in Tanya, okay? So when we know the Torah and it becomes part of us, then these positive emotions flow forth from us. And that this is because the da'at, the knowledge that we're talking about, once, when Torah knowledge is wisdom, when it's just information that you haven't understood yet, it's objective. When you understand it and you subject it to logic, that's objective, an objective process. Okay? It's all if-then logic. Okay? But then once it becomes part of you and knowledge, it is objective if all of that process has taken place, because it's an objective understanding. But the knowledge of it can no longer really be called subjective, because it's connected to you. It's what you think now, not what Elohim is telling you, but what you think. It becomes a part of your thinking. It becomes an opinion. It becomes what you want, not what he wants. Therefore, as a result, not just what he wants, because you're becoming conformed to him. Okay? So then that opinion, we can be dispassionate about something that's objective, and we can, attend a science conference and debate string theory versus that theory versus another theory. But when it is actually something that we know inside of us and is an opinion, then we are passionate about it. It drives us, and it drives our emotions and the way we feel about Elohim and the way we feel about sin, about the transgression of the Torah. Okay. All right, so that's all that we have for today's study. We're going to continue in our next study in chapter 4 of Tanya. So until next time, shalom, and I hope you'll join us next time for lesson 4 in Lessons in Tanya.